Thank you, Honorable Speaker. First, on a light note, Honorable Speaker, you know, I have always argued with John Mbadi on the floor on who qualified before the other. Now that we are birds of a feather, I can now confirm from his certificates that I actually qualified 6 months ahead of him. But, Honorable Speaker, besides being birds of a feather in the profession, let me declare interest because John Mbadi was also an accountant at the university when I was a student there. And having served with him in this house for almost 12 years, and I chaired the Budget and Appropriations Committee, where he has been a member since he joined Parliament, if I'm right.
That's correct.
So, John Mbadi, now CS nominee Finance in the National Treasury, and you've put it very well, and you know there are many things that we agree on, especially regarding the budget-making process. And having been a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee and also chaired the Public Accounts Committee, you have said you have had a very good oversight of the expenditure side of government. And I must agree also with you on the revenue side in terms of the finance bill being an omnibus bill and things that we can secure from the finance bill that seem to have been lost. But you've also touched on issues touching on KRA, and there are systemic problems in KRA. And you and me know that our revenue projections, we have always not agreed with them. I now want to hear what you intend to do now that the shoe is on the other foot, to make sure that our revenue projections are as realistic as possible. Because, you know, part of the problems that we've had with our fiscal deficit is unrealistic revenue projections coming from the National Treasury and, of course, having emanated from KRA. You've spoken about the systemic problems in KRA, including the lack of custom systems management, proper customs management systems at KRA. I would also want to hear what you intend to do. And you know there is resistance within KRA to have proper systems put in place. Because as you say, especially on the custom side, people are minting hundreds of millions for themselves at the expense of the nation. I want to hear specific what specific measures you intend to take at KRA to ensure first that there are proper systems. Because as you rightly said, that is what is lacking within KRA, besides the management problems that you have alluded to. I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Can you manage two in a row? Junet?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to ask the nominee, Chairman. You see,
he is here as a nominee and not as a chairman of any formation out there.
Honestly,
actually, I hope, Mr. Speaker, he was not referring to me being the chairman of ODM. I've already resigned.
Oh.
Yes.
You know, Mr. Speaker, you know, for when you call somebody for the last 15 years chairman, that
yes.
becomes his name.
Yes.
Anytime I find I used to call him chairman. Now, Mr. Nominee, one thing I wanted to ask you is that you have explained it very well, but you have come to this position. You are coming to this position at a time when the economy is not in a very good situation. And as you are aware, 70 shillings of the 100 shillings collected is going to pay debt. And Kenyans don't even know whether we are paying real debt or fake debt. That's what they're grappling with. So how will you ascertain what kind of debt we have, whether it is a fake debt or real debt? Secondly, as you are aware, the poor in this Kenya feel that this economy is rigged against them. They don't feel they are part of this economy. What measures will you put in place to tell Kenyans, the poor ones, that you are part and parcel of this economy? Issues of pending bills, Chair. Issues of 30% of the budget. I mean, nominee. Nominee. Issues of 30%. How will you achieve 30% of our budget to go to the development expenditure? My last question is, nominee, you know very well, me and you never believed in this bottom-up economy. Now we have found ourselves here. You know what we believed in. You know, your principle must guide you. How are you going to marry these different thoughts of bottom-up economy and what you believed in? You participated in manufacturing another economic manifesto. So tell me how you'll marry the two, Mr. Nobini. This bottom thing now that you're inside.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me start by addressing...
Leave the laughing to the public. Just listen and...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. I think... thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to start by responding to the questions raised by the Leader of Majority, my friend Kimani Ichung'wah. Yes, I agree. We have complained, Mr. Speaker, previously that our budget estimates, especially on revenue side, are not realistic. In fact, I'm persuaded that we have been using revenue as a balancing figure. Revenue projection as a balancing figure. It's like what we do as a country is we look at our expenditure level, where we want to spend, how much we want to spend. Then once we get that total, then we ask ourselves how much can we raise from the loan or debt market, external and domestic. Then the remaining amount we put as revenue projection. That to me is very wrong. We must reform the economic policy department of National Treasury. Reforming does not mean you lay off staff. I want to be very clear there. Just focus our economic projections so that they are realistic, they are based on evidence of economic growth. If previously you have not been able to collect so much, why do you then pretend that you can collect so much in the subsequent year? Like, Mr. Speaker, we have collected only 2.2 trillion this year from ordinary revenue. Yet we are projecting to collect, we had projected initially before the challenges we faced with the finance bill, to collect 2.9. That is a whooping 700 billion increase. That was not realistic. Right now it has come back to, or come down to 2.6. So we must be realistic in our revenue projections. But even be that as it may, we must also still enhance revenue collection by reforming KRA, because we are still under collecting. But in terms of budgeting and projections, I agree with Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah that we are going forward, we are going to be more realistic so that we don't have big budget deficits and budget revisions in the course of the year as we have had it previously. In terms of how do we address the challenges of collection of taxes, custom duties, it is, and I mentioned it, the system is porous. We must make sure that we automate it and automate it properly. Sometimes we pretend to be using automation, yet we use outdated systems, systems that are just aiding the leakage of revenue instead of helping. We must carry out proper review and evaluation of KRA. I have the first meetings, I will guarantee this committee, if you approve my nomination to become the CS, National Treasury, my first meetings will be focused on how to reform KRA. Because without that, we are not going to succeed in revenue mobilization. Honorable Junet, you've raised the issue of debt, and you have asked, how do we determine real from fake debt? I don't want to use it fake or real, but I talked about accountability, debt accountability, public debt accountability. And I said, I am committing that we must try to make this a statutory document so that every Kenyan knows how much we owe, to who, and at what cost. The other thing that I want to talk about in debt management is we must manage our liability. We have to restructure our debts. Let me just give me 1 minute, Mr. Speaker, to say the following. That if you look at how our debt was structured, especially external debt, in 2010, we had 60% of that debt, 66 actually, under multilateral, which are concessionary loans, and only 4% on commercial debt. We moved to a point where 31% in 2020, 31% of our debt was commercial debt. Averaging interest rate is 8 to 9%. That is not sustainable for an economy. It is now coming down, it is 23%. My focus is to have commercial debt at no more than 5% of our debt portfolio, external debt portfolio, and have 75% of our debt under multilateral debt and only 20% or thereabout on bilateral debts. With that, you can clearly reduce the cost of debt. But something else about debt is, Mr. Speaker, and sample this, honorable members, our debt portfolio is 50-50, almost, external, domestic. Yet interest payable per year on external debt is 260 billion, on domestic debt is 700 and almost 50 billion. 3 times we are over borrowing domestically. And we have raised the interest rates of borrowing domestically. I know I'm one of the people, if you look at my wealth declaration, I have a government bond I've bought of 13 million, and I'm getting almost 16% returns. That is unsustainable. We must have a conversation, Mr. Speaker, and not to scare anyone. We must have a conversation with banks. We are not going to control interest rates.
We want you to give the country hope.
Yes.
You are doing so.
Yeah.
Yes.
We are not, I'm not going to advocate for interest rates control, as in setting the rates to be charged. It had very disastrous result when we attempted that, remember, through a legislation. But banks promised us, Mr. Speaker, banks promised us that if we remove the rate caps, they would loan even more to the private sector. Presently, that is not the case. In fact, bank executives sometimes can just sit and take teas and do nothing, but still make money for shareholders by buying government bonds and government bills. We must move away from that. Actually, we have crowded out private sector. You can see the youth is up in arms. They have no jobs because the private sector is not borrowing money from the
not lending.
The private sector is not borrowing money
from banks, yes,
to invest, and so we can create jobs.
Yes.
I know that one of the reasons why we have been raising the interest rate is to control inflation. Inflation has reasonably been controlled now at 4.6%. We must also be alive to the fact that we must balance the two. There must be a net-off effect so that we also grow our economy. Thank you. Finally, there was the issue of what do we do about the poor and the pending bills. Pending bills is a serious matter, Mr. Speaker. I think it is something that we must agree on. I know we are moving as a country to accrual basis. As an accountant, I know with the accrual basis of accounting, then we will not be talking about pending bills because there will be no cutoff. Any bill that comes will automatically move to the next financial year and pay it. But these pending bills, a lot of them are also fictitious. I know there is a committee in place, and I don't want to criticize that committee. I know it is headed by the former Auditor General, Edward Ouko. But, Mr. Speaker, I ask myself this question. The pending bills that I'm told have been submitted to that committee, or before that committee, is upwards of 663 billion claims. And there are a total of 114,000 plus of those claims. How do you have one auditor, even if you are a genius, with a few months to audit that and give you? So what I'm saying in a nutshell, Mr. Speaker, is that we need to have a system where there is nothing like pending bills verification, because it has become a way of just failing to pay bills that are owed. We must have a system.
Not only that, nominee, you remember about 8 years ago, there was a committee to verify pending bills. It became a toll station. And all the committee was doing is go to a town like Eldoret, pitch in a hotel, and people with so-called pending bills turn up with briefcases and have their pending bills approved.
Exactly.
You remember?
Yes.
Yes.
And
what are you going to do differently?
It may happen again and again. What my proposal would be is that we may have to have a system, and it can even be through a legislation, where a legislation we have in the PFM Act that pending bills form first charge. But we should criminalize failure to pay pending bills. But above all, as CS Finance, which does not even require any policy or any legislative intervention, I will make sure that we have a system in place which locks anyone who attempts to pay a new bill and ignoring an old one. The system can lock you out, so that first in, first out. If a bill is supposed to be payable, let it be paid. This idea, I remember I've been an accountant at the University of Nairobi, and during our time as a speaker, what used to happen is you'd prepare checks. You know, there was cash flow problems. You'd prepare checks and put them in a drawer, many of them, a bundle. And so people come, and there was a big black book which was called check register. So the suppliers come, and checks are issued through that register. So depending on how nice you talk to the accounts department, then your check is released. Yet the one for Honorable Speaker even goes stale after 6 months. Those are things that we can cure through a system where you have an accounting system which allows payments to be made on first come, first served basis. Thank you. Finally, Honorable Junet asked me a question I didn't expect to come from him, but I expected to come. Mr. Speaker, I've been asked about bottom-up. Bottom-up economic transformation agenda. That is how it is called. Let me tell you, through you, Mr. Speaker, tell Honorable Junet this, that bottom-up is actually a concept of UDA, read Kenya Kwanza. But I want to tell him that if you look at the philosophy of UDA and ODM, there is no difference. Actually, the two are social democrats.
Yes.
The two political parties promote social democracy. But let me leave that for that. Look at better. What is it all about? It talks about job creation. It talks about cost of living. It talks about agricultural productivity. It talks about digital economy. What about ODM? What was in our manifesto? We talked about the same. Actually, the better concept is on value addition. Now, ODM manifesto, which I participated in drafting, we had manufacturing, emphasizing on agriculture as raw material. So it is manufacturing supported by agriculture.
Did you read Animal Farm?
I read it some time back, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
But now, better is on value addition.
Yes.
For agriculture for value addition. ODM, agriculture for manufacturing. Semantics. But again, finally, Mr. Speaker, housing was our concept, both of us. But finally, Mr. Speaker, there is the Constitution and the PFM Act, which will guide my conduct in office, if approved. Thank you.
Naisula, yes.
If you allow me, Honorable Speaker, just a supplementary on one of the things John Mbadi said around working with the National Treasury and your work as a member of Parliament, the abuse of Article 223.
Yes.
And you know, since we were both in the Budget Committee, this has been a huge problem. And it continues to date. You've had in the recent past very senior government officers trying to twist people in the National Treasury to pay even confidential expenditure out of Article 223. I want to hear what you intend to do to now stem from the root cause or where this problem emanates from, the National Treasury, abuse of Article 223. Lastly, when you spoke about the good things that we lost in the finance bill, you may or you may not agree with me that partially the problem was out of very poor communication by the National Treasury. Kenyans out there were left to just listen to what was being said by members of parliament during debate on the finance bill to know what were the good things in that finance bill. How differently will you now, at the helm of the National Treasury, if approved by this committee, will you communicate to Kenyans to be able to know that a finance bill, as you said, is an omnibus bill? It has very many good things for the benefit of the country, which get lost in the misinformation and disinformation campaign that was there with the last one. So my question is, how will you shift the communication from the National Treasury? And with all respect to those who were there before, there was literally no communication coming from the National Treasury. How do you intend to change that? And I agree with you on the pending bills, but also tell you that probably what you also need to do is look at the procurement. For instance, and you've been a member of parliament all these years, CDF. There are never any pending bills in CDF because of the system through which we procure. You only procure when you have exchequer with you. So probably if you get approved, that's one of the other things you need to look at, to remodel whatever is being done in mainstream government with CDF.
Mr. Speaker, go ahead. Okay.
Thank you, Speaker. To the nominee, Honorable Mbadi, you are on record in Parliament during debate of the last approval of the cabinet secretaries, and it's gone viral, widely known, that you referred to the cabinet secretaries then as skunks. Now you find yourself as one of the nominees. Are you a skunk or are you not? The second question is that we have advisors who, I'm reliably informed, sit at State House, who advise the President on matters economy. You will be seated at Treasury. I would like to know, between if this committee and the National Assembly approves you, you will have your opinion, they will have their opinion. How do you marry the two to make sure that you're talking the same? Because we have seen in the public some of the advisors talking like they're not in the same government, like the way how they work. So I would like to know which supersedes the other, and how will you make sure that you work together on matters economy and as you advise the President. Finally, there's been allegations that in Treasury we have people who've been there for so long. Times have changed. You're seeing we are in very extraordinary times. We need to think extraordinary to get our country to where we want to be. How do we make sure once you're there, you are not held captive? Because we have seen other CSAs with very good credentials. Even you, if approved, I don't know what happens when you go there. I don't know whether it is the system, you become captives of IMF, you become captives of what is going on. What will you do differently? Because we are in very extraordinary times, Mr. Nominee. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, allow me to, in response to the questions by Leader Majority, to start with the pending bills on. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I had a lot to say, but because of limitation of time, I left out something on the issue of pricing and general procurement and supply chain management. That is an area that we must address. It is what we would call addressing corruption. Mr. Speaker, if you are to buy omena in Kisumu and buy it in Kericho, despite even the transport cost, you are almost buying it at the same price. But in the same government building, 5th floor, 10th floor, buying the same item at different prices. We cannot continue like that as a country. We must find a system of standardizing our prices. And again, there has been talk about automation. End-to-end procurement must now be implemented. We cannot procrastinate further. Kenyans are crying for value for money. Kenyans are talking about economy in the use of our resources. That must be realized by deliberately ensuring that we automate procurement, from the budgeting to procurement, to receipt of goods, to payment. It must be end to end. This idea of saying we will implement it in July, now it has been moved to January. The moment I become a CS, I want to make sure that that is implemented so that there is value for money. We can save. The former president talked about us losing 2 billion shillings a day. The current president has also talked about us wastage. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you'll remember there was a time we used to talk about 10%. Now it is 30% and counting. If you listen to those who are involved in procurement, we cannot continue in that trajectory, especially now that resources are becoming more and more scarce. We must make sure that the little resources that we'll collect, and that is the responsibility of CS Finance, by the way, to ensure that there is proper accountability and transparency in the use of public resources. On the issue...
Mbadi, are you saying that we, apart from the IFMI system is not working?
It is not end-to-end. IFMI system is, the procurement is broken. It is not end-to-end. They will tell you we have automated procurement. It's not true. So we must make sure that from budgeting all the way to payment and even use of goods, it is seamlessly integrated. We must do that. Mr. Speaker, and they have pushed that to January. They have been pushing that automation. Every time they push it, the time comes, they push it. If procurement is pushed, another date is given. So there must be a stop to that, and that stop, hopefully, will be under my leadership at the Treasury. On the issue of...
if we approve you, in how many days will you achieve this?
I want to work with the new set deadline of January, so that we don't pass January again. Okay. Yes. The communication, I am in total agreement. In fact, the reason why we lost the finance bill was communication. And this we must change. And by the way, one thing that I would want to talk about and maybe advise the current government, now that I'm going to sit at the highest policy decision-making body, if approved, is that we must improve on our communication. All departments, communication cannot be left to one individual called communication, Honorable Mwaura, no, government spokesman. We must have every ministry and department communicating explicitly and clearly to Kenyans. And Treasury is going to lead. I have already inquired and found that we have a state-of-the-art media center at the Treasury on 14th floor, Mr. Speaker. That must be utilized properly. But again, we must understand that the current generation would not be very comfortable with the conventional, the traditional ways of communicating. We must be innovative. We must use the current system of communication. I know I'm not in Gen Z, I'm not a millennial, but we must be responsive to the way they communicate. And my ministry will adopt modern methods of communication. The final one was from Honorable Shungwe, and it was the first one. What did you ask about the Finance Bill 2024? That
Finance Bill was on what you have actually
what I've just now, Article 223.
Article 223 abuse.
Now, Honorable Shungwe and I have complained over the years about this Article 223 being misused and abused. Remember, Mr. Speaker, Ruaraka land was bought through Article 223, which, if you look at the Constitution and PFM Act, is very clear on how we should apply or use Article 223. It was for a good intention, that before that the government may find that there is something that should be addressed urgently, but there are not enough funds. Yet now we abuse it. We spend it on anything. Fortunately, it requires approval of the CS Treasury. And so if that abuse is to continue, it is John Mbadi, if you approve my nomination, who will continue with that bad habit. But I came up with a legislation, Mr. Speaker, not to cause any aspersion on this when I was just recently. I'm still a member of Parliament anyway. I wanted to have some controls and checks on application of this Article 223. It was frustrated at the committee stage of the House, Committee of Finance. Why? Because Treasury refused to accept that legislation, where I wanted, before money is spent, before Cabinet Secretary approves, he should inform Parliament, give Parliament 17 days, just because Parliament is the one that has the constitutional mandate to approve expenditure. No any other body, even Cabinet Secretary. But now, it was frustrated. I hope another member will pick it up, now that I'm there, so that I don't resist it further. But I want to give guarantee in the meantime, with the current legal framework, I will not allow for abuse of this.
You become part of government, introduce us a government bill through the majority leader.
I will be very happy to take it up if he sends it as
take
Minister
it to
now.
cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. But Mr. Speaker, let me just give confidence that this article will not be abused, even with the current legal framework. Okay. To the questions by Honorable Naisula, skunk. Mr. Speaker, let me say the following. Up to now, I'm a member of the National Assembly with a mandate to oversight, with a mandate to legislate and to represent. Mr. Speaker, I have a duty, up to now, to vet and approve President's appointees. I must discharge that mandate properly. And that is what I did. I am moving to the other side of the executive. I will not have that mandate anymore. It is now the mandate of Honorable Naisula and the rest of us to determine whether John Mbadi is a skunk or not. I want to leave it there. On advisors, it is true, and by the way, you can't stop the president from having advisors, whether political, economic, or otherwise. He has that mandate, he has that authority to hire. The only thing I want to state is legally, I am the principal, or I'm going to be the principal, if approved, advisor to the president on matters finance. You advise, the person advised takes the advice or not. You cannot force the person you advise to take your advice. But I also believe that these people are professionals like me. So we would be engaging at one point and agreeing or disagreeing, but the final decision will be taken by the cabinet, which is chaired by the president. Finally, the only caution I would give is, if you are an advisor, please make sure the person you advise communicates. Don't communicate on behalf of the person you advise. So if I have advisors today, what I would do is to tell my advisors, please make sure when you advise me, I communicate the advice.
The rule of thumb, advisors are never known.
Thank you.
They are backroom operators.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Finally, it's about, you are very polite. They call them treasury mandarins. The people who frustrate the efforts, the good efforts of the treasury. I don't want to call them treasury mandarins. Some of these gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, are actually very experienced. Almost all of them, by the way, very experienced economists, accountants, finance experts, etc. It is just about leadership. I'll provide leadership at the treasury so that we make sure that we work for the interest of this country. If there are gaps, I want to call them gaps. If there are gaps in resource capacity or human resource capacity at the treasury, I will liaise with the relevant authorities to make sure that those gaps are filled. Thank you.
Yes, Nelson.